Let's just briefly talk about the Northern Renaissance. The Northern Renaissance is different from that in Italy because the Northern Renaissance is more focused on Christianity. Whereas the humanism in Italy is focused on individuals looking at human beings, using the Greco-Romans as a source for understanding humans and thinking about human beings.
Wait, is the Northern Renaissance in Northern Europe or in Italy?
It's in Northern Europe. The Northern Renaissance, which is in the German areas, and even Thomas More out in England, the Northern Renaissance will be focused on a Christian humanism. In other words, Christians seeking to understand God and their connection to God. Erasmus of Rotterdam is the most prominent of these Christian humanists and is the great writer of the early 16th century. Erasmus discusses a philosophy of Christ, and that's his term, that people need to learn the philosophy of Christ. Not merely learn what activities they need to do and what sacrifices, what sacraments they need to do and what fasts they need to do. It's not about action, but about knowledge. So therefore, Erasmus encourages learning, like we saw with the humanism in Italy, but Erasmus wants people to learn about Christianity and their relation with God. And he wants them to think about living life like Christ lived. Erasmus mocks some of the church practices. For example, his book, In Praise of Folly, mocks different ecclesiastical practices and instead emphasizes the importance, basically calls it folly, that people think that wearing certain colors or doing certain activities will get them into heaven. But instead, Erasmus focuses on individuals living a good Christian moral lifestyle, that is key for salvation. But Thomas More is also a Northern Renaissance thinker. More is also a Christian humanist in that he suggests that humans need to think about Christ. But he's also just an interesting thinker in general. We read his Utopia, in which he just sort of does this thought experiment about what the world could be like, what an ideal world could be like. And Thomas More also is a reflection of the change that has occurred with the discovery of the New World. Utopia, of course, taking place in the New World. And More thinking about, well, what could be different? What could an ideal society be like? How could that work? It's that inquiry, that sense of what else could be out there. How can we think differently? It's that sense of inquiry that the Renaissance sparks. That therefore allows us to connect the Renaissance to the scientific revolution that happened soon thereafter. That sense of inquiry, what can be different, how can things be better, that allows us to connect the Renaissance to the Reformation, which is religious thinkers thinking about reforms that can happen in the church. So, and the great Northern Renaissance artist is Albrecht Dürer. Dürer brings the techniques of the Italian Renaissance up north in his paintings. He also does many prints in which he, has these prints that are able to be printed out in large numbers using the printing press, which has been discovered in the north. Of course, it briefly predates our period, 1450s, where technically we begin. And I believe the first printing presses are established in the early 1400s. And so that's, of course, by Gutenberg. I think it might be in the 1430s and 40s that he's specializing in the printing press. And of course, Dürer will actually be one of the first early Protestant artists. And one of his most famous images is actually a portrait of Martin Luther.